Hey everyone, it's Paul and Elijah. We're back here on the Think Truth podcast, ready to discuss an interesting topic here again. So I got into hot water recently because I was making fun of a song that somebody really liked. So it was I'll Fly Away. We're getting ready to sing that with some friends, and I started making fun of it because it's an eminently sort of
sorry if anyone likes the song. They stopped listening. It's over. But maybe they want to hear the mocking. Sort of,
I don't know. It's the song to make fun of.
It's one of them. Father Abraham is the one I
Yeah, for real. One time we started singing this and we couldn't figure out where Paul was, and so we decided to start singing Father Abraham
till I showed up. Yes.
And it wasn't very long.
Yes.
He appeared out of the woodwork. Okay, so we're here with friends, and I start making fun of I'll Fly Away, and then I was informed that this is one of their favorite songs because it was connected to somebody who had passed away. Who was very
right, and we want to obviously be sensitive to that, and there's good reason why songs have sentimental value, even if they're not great songs. I mean, that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
But this concept, is absolutely something that we need to talk about.
Right.
It's past due.
So this reminds me of another song that's a great example, and this will be fewer people's favorite songs probably.
That's good.
I mean, I hope. But it's this song called I should have gotten the book out, but When the Ransom Get Home.
Oh yes.
And this has incredible lyrics.
I take it that that's not entirely positive.
Well, yeah. So, but this really is is representative of what we're talking about. So I'll read parts of it because it's good. When the ransomed get home to that land fair and bright, where the loved ones now wait, mid the scenes of delight, what a joy it will be to be numbered up there with the faithful and true in that home bright and fair. The chorus goes like, when the ransomed get home, what a joy it will be to be gathered up there, blessed Savior, with thee, where no partings ever come, and we never more roam in that beautiful land when the ransomed get home. When the ransom shall rise to the glorious bliss of that land far away, fairer, brighter than this, what a shouting will sound through heaven's fair dome on that beautiful shore when the ransom get home. There's only one more verse here, thankfully. When the ransom cross over to that bright golden plains with what a beautiful song, what melodious strains will be wafted away mid the domes of the sky when the ransom get home in the sweet by and by. Now, again, if you like this song, that's fine. Like, there's reasons to like songs other than their lyrics. But that doesn't seem to be talking about an intermediate state.
Yeah, never more Rome.
Yeah, and it's this land far away, this sweet place that currently exists, and is going to be this place that we're all looking forward to sort of finally getting to. Some people are there now, and the rest of us want to get there, and that's it.
Home implies like this is where we're
at. And it seems, unless I'm drastically misreading the song, but it seems as though it's thinking of that as kind of our ultimate destination. I think it's a great example of sad theology.
So, like we started talking about last time, how do we get away from what really is the Christian hope, which is the resurrection?
Right.
And it's an embodied existence with Jesus as King.
Right. To
this idea of somewhere way out there as souls, we're going to experience some blissful state.
Right.
It's a contradictory idea that shouldn't belong in our hymn books.
No.
But it does.
For now. Yes.
So this is something that when I first remember really getting the concept of the resurrection, this starts to sound cliche, but it changed my view of Scripture. Like I started reading Scripture entirely different.
Yeah. And
things that, even in the prophets, foreseeing the future, things that didn't make sense to me, or I had to put on to a something about Israel, let's say, because it was so physical. And I was like, that couldn't belong to the church because we're headed to heaven.
Right.
Suddenly made sense.
Right. And that's another modern reason why some of this dualism has taken over has been the rise of the very modern, now mostly extinct phenomenon of dispensationalism.
Yes.
Because the early dispensationalism of John Nelson Darby and the other kind of early pioneers of this idea, taught a very strict heaven and earth distinction where sort of they're kind of like two peoples of God, the church, which is they're the heaven, they sort of belong in heaven, and Israel, which sort of belongs on the earth.
Yeah, they get the earth somehow.
Right, but that isn't, I'm not sure if that's meant to be better or worse or neither, but it does, it splits a lot of things that aren't supposed to be split, but that does, I mean, that carries in, and then you'll see it in some of the songs if you've written around that era or later.
Yeah.
That's,
Early dispensationalism is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's extinct, but but that's one of the more modern American, especially, causes, I think, of some of the stuff we were talking about last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good thing to bring in. So this is exciting for me to think about talking about this in the podcast, because it's one of the things that really animates my view of God in the scriptures. Is thinking about the central hope of Christians as the resurrection. To me, it changed my view of God, actually, from and my view of the future too, because the future hope to me was so ethereal and mystical or mysterious rather, that it didn't really possess any sense of true hope. Like it was something that I knew I should hope for,
right,
more than I actually did hope for. I couldn't get the interesting phenomenon of floating on the clouds or
whatever,
harps or crowns on the head or whatever. Like there's a lot of stuff that that sort of belonged to my mind to like the heaven stuff that was all in the future. That didn't sound super exciting to me, and I always figured it was because I wasn't spiritual enough. And if I were spiritual enough, I would just be super delighted about floating on the clouds. And when I finally got the picture that the church taught, and the early apostles taught, and Jesus taught, and the prophets spoke of the resurrection, it was like click, click, click. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And ever since, I feel like I've been excited in a way that I wasn't before about the future.
It also, I think, helps to reconnect, to remember that, that the God of redemption is also the God of creation. Like, to me, that was one of the things that I think recognizing the hope of new creation and recognizing that redemption is about resurrection and restoration meant that I don't have to have sort of two different, I mean, this sounds crazy, but almost two different gods. Like there's the church God when I go to church, and that's, Jesus dies on the cross to forgive me from sins, I go to heaven. Then I go outside and I look at the beauty of nature, and I remember, God created the world. But obviously I thought they're the same being, but there seemed very little overlap between those two glories of God. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, good, God created a beautiful world, but then I sort of leave that outside the church when and then come into church, and now Jesus is saving me from my sins. Yeah. But the doctrine of the resurrection and the hope of the new creation means that the God of redemption, the God of creation, it's one, because redemption is about restoring the beauty and the glory of creation. Mm-hmm. And it's one and the same. It's the ending that one would expect given the beginning of the story. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like I was trying to put together what seemed like two different stories. Yeah. I think that's what we all phrased, right?
Right.
And it's like, no, actually, this is one story that actually makes sense if you sort of delete the extraneous elements.
Yeah, exactly. We joked about calling this podcast the Heaven Is Not For Real podcast episode, because a big part of the misconception, as we talked about some in the first episode, and we're getting into here, a misconception about the future is that us going to heaven is what it's all about. And so let's pivot into talking about, okay, what if you're a person listening to Paul the Apostle or someone else talking about the future for the church, like hang on through persecution, whatever, because this is what's coming. What were you hearing?
Well, he almost never talks about the intermediate state.
Yeah.
Like very little. He says a couple things about it, but that's not what Paul's talking about. Like hardly ever.
Yeah.
He's talking almost all the time about his hope of attaining in Philippians, right? Mm-hmm. Pressing forward to what lies ahead, forgetting what's behind. He's like, not that I have already attained this, but I press on to make it my own, so that I might attain the resurrection of the dead. Right? When he's before King Agrippa or whatever, he talks about the hope of the resurrection of the dead. And when he's in Romans 8, he's talking about, walking by the Spirit, because if you walk by the Spirit now, that means you will inherit everything that Jesus is an heir of, and that means the creation is groaning right now and waiting for the sons of God to be revealed in the resurrection. Like it is for Paul, it's a future hope, and I think we've turned it into a non-future hope, into a sort of timeless hope.
Yeah,
we've deleted our eschatology, which is super odd. So eschatology has been relegated to sort of weird debates over how to interpret the book of Revelation in various ways, and we did podcast episodes on that. So, but instead of and then we don't really, eschatology isn't our hope. Whereas in Christianity, all of us, including Jesus, are all waiting for something to happen that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Right? Except in Jesus. Like, that's the thing. Jesus is this one strange piece of what's going to happen to all the rest of us now. So he's the one who's actually raised from the dead in the way that all the rest of us will be. So we know it's going to happen, and we know it's already started. Yeah. But we've kind of gotten rid of that and assumed, almost acted as though everyone who's dead, like as soon as you die, it's more like
you're in this state.
Yeah, it's like an up hope instead of a forward hope.
Yeah.
I think.
Right. Yeah, so I think the Heavens for Real book is emblematic of like the idea of heaven as sort of this. So it's a misunderstanding of Scripture where you sort of mix in all of the metaphors from Revelation, like seeing the pearly gates and Peter standing outside. Like,
yes,
sort of this
although Peter standing outside is not anywhere in the Bible. I mean, I'd be happy, having written a dissertation on Peter. I'd be happy to meet him early on, but he probably, I'm not sure if he'd like me.
Yeah, but the pearly gates from New Jerusalem or whatever, like sort of mixing that in heaven.
Right.
It's this super odd mixture. Some of it influenced by dispensationalism, some of it mixed up through premillennialism and other things, misinterpreting the book of Revelation. But ultimately, where it's this place, like the whole idea of you can have a vision or dream or whatever, go to heaven when you die and come back, is like it's someplace sort of vertical that you can escape from your body, see your body maybe on the operating table or whatever as you go up, and then you're in this heaven reality, and there's gates you can knock on somewhere up there.
Yeah.
And the streets of gold and whatever.
Right. It's a conflation. So because we believe in the intermediate state. So like some people are going to be like, oh my goodness, what happened?
I don't believe in heaven.
Yeah. No, we do, if you mean that.
But you don't belong there.
Right. You are there because that's where Jesus is right now.
Yeah.
And Jesus is going to keep you until it's time to raise you from the dead. And so that's wonderful. It has to be a good place to be if Jesus is there. But of course, it's the risen Jesus that's there, fascinatingly enough, right?
Yeah.
And it's a place of waiting, right? So that's the thing. I'm sure it's a beautiful place, but it's all the imagery from the end of Revelation, sort of talking about when God will create a new heavens and new earth. That's not here yet. That doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. Right.
And all as sort of Hebrews, sort of 11 to 13 talks about, Hebrews 12, I guess. Since we have such a great cloud of witnesses waiting, let us run with endurance the race. And sort of the idea, as I read from one scholar one time, is like, they're all waiting, sort of cheering us on and waiting for all of us to finish the race until it's the day when all of us finally, the last one of us reaches the finish line. Then we experience what God has together. Right. It's very much that the entire church, all of God's people, alive and with the Lord, and Jesus himself, are all waiting together for that new age. Right.
Yeah.
And Revelation, of course, talks about this when it speaks of things like the martyrs, who are the souls of the martyrs, kind of waiting in this weird place.
Saying how long?
Yeah, saying how long, and God tells them just wait until everyone else, and this is all done, right? And they're waiting for their resurrection, right?
Yeah. And so the idea of these disembodied people who really want to be embodied in God's new creation, the idea that they're saying how long,
Right.
the whole idea is like the real thing that they're waiting for is not what they're experiencing now.
Right. As good as it is. I mean, being in Jesus' presence has to be much better than being in a broken world.
Yeah.
But what has to be better than both of those things is being on a restored world with the risen Jesus.
Yeah.
Like that is what that's what Paul said. That's exactly what Paul said, right? That's the best of all possible worlds.
Yeah. So two thoughts that maybe we can launch into the next thing. First of all, that heaven is God's space, and I think this is a Bible project. I'm kind of using their language.
And N.T. Wright, I think, talks this way too.
Okay,
right? God's space.
And heaven is definitely a good place, as we were just saying.
Right.
But it's one way to put this is it's not the place for us ultimately.
Right.
And heaven is not far away. Heaven is not a place, that's like up in the sky.
Right.
If you,
I mean, sure, it's helpful to sort
was that like Russian cosmonaut who went up in space and was like, yeah, I've seen outer space and God wasn't there.
And someone said, well, if he would have sort of jumped out of his thing, he would have found him. But yeah. And there's, and it can interact with Earth in various ways. And that's the Christian hope is, yes, we don't quote belong ultimately in heaven, but heaven belongs on earth ultimately.
Yeah.
Like, so we're not saying, oh my goodness, like we're stuck here away from heaven for eternity. No. The idea as Wright or others say is that the two come together. Mm-hmm. That's what new creation, that's what the restoration is all about, is about God's space and human space, sort of the two becoming one.
Good.
In a sense.
Yeah. And that's where I was going with my second point.
Oh, sorry.
That's great. So I think we need to talk about that so if we understand that God's space and man's space are supposed to be together, and if we understand how that looked in the Old Testament and going into the New Testament,
right.
I think that helps us understand why it is heaven come down to earth,
right.
Jerusalem descending from God.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate goal.
Right.
So let's talk about that. So we have Genesis, right, is where everything starts. But
the garden temple where God works.
That's really important though, because that's where heaven and earth were originally together.
Yeah.
And this temple imagery is
the temple imagery in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve sort of functioning as these living statues of God representing God, but also having the special connection to God in the garden. And then this sort imagery, what I say is
proto-priests in some
kind
ways.
of proto-priests, right? And that the garden, what I like to say is less that the Garden of Eden was a temple, and more that later temples and tabernacles are like portable. I think Tim Mackey says like portable Edens or something.
Oh, nice.
It kind of it's sort of like they're in capturing what Eden, in a sense, what Eden was supposed to be, and that's why you see Eden-like imagery in sort of the tabernacle with the lampposts and the and some of the artwork and different things like that.
Yeah. And it's interesting that in both in Genesis and then the word used for the priest is like to minister,
right,
or to serve.
Evod and Shamar, to work and to keep it to guard.
Words. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super fascinating.
So
So in temples and in the Garden of Eden, the point is you want to create this space where humans and God interact, God's space and man's space. It's not just that God sort of looks down and does some things in man's space, but like in these spaces, God was actually like living. Like that was the point. They had this space where in some sense God was like
showing up and walking around. And that's the whole idea of the Israelites' relationship to God, is that they would be the people that God was committed to, and that God could dwell in their midst, right? And which is why they got to kick out all the uncleanness. Right, they had to be clean, and then God's presence was there with them, like living with them in this tent, because of their sin. Like ideally, God could walk around in their midst, presumably. Yeah. But because of sin, they had to be sort of the Eden's. Like Israel was supposed to be an Eden space, but then sort of the temple was like an Eden space within the Eden space because they were also a fallen space, right? So things get mixed up. But the goal was not just that Israel has lots of cool land and cool stuff and lots of money, but that this is the place where God's presence was with them, right?
Yeah.
So it's that idea. If that idea was actually able to be perfectly lived, embodied, and sort of realized, I should say, that's new creation. Mm-hmm. That's a fully restored earth with God's presence there, as Revelation 21 says, no temple in that city, because the whole thing is the temple now. Mm-hmm. It's that presence just expanded over the whole new creation.
Yeah. And like the vision of Isaiah, I've just been reading through it or listening to Isaiah this week. He's the one, I believe, who says, in that day, the glory of the Lord, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will be over the earth as the waters
cover the sea. Yeah. So it's this it's really
the whole earth.
It's kind of a marriage idea, right? It's heaven and earth, whereas God and his people becoming one flesh, essentially.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Okay, so there's a related question, which is, so if heaven's supposed to be on earth, brought down to earth, connected to earth in some way, I think it begs the question, interestingly, about what heavenly beings are made of. Can they interact with earth? Right?
Oh.
And of course they can.
They can.
But heavenly, and of course we don't know exactly what they made of. But it, like I was listening to a Bible Project podcast that was talking about how heavenly beings were considered by the Jewish people to be in some ways more real or tangible. It wasn't just that they were like spirit beings that didn't have a body. They did have bodies, but they just weren't made of the same human stuff, physical stuff of this creation or whatever. And so that again, bringing out the point that the distinction, the sharp distinction between spirit and body, and the idea that God's space is sort of comprised only of like the mysterious, bodiless, whatever.
Flashes of light or something.
As opposed to earth, which is all like, that's not exactly accurate.
Yeah, it might be too sharp of a line. So what we're saying, we talk about sort of the hope of the new creation is heaven sort of coming to earth. What we still mean though is that it's a very physical place. The new earth, which doesn't exist currently. Yeah, like you can't go there if you die right now because it doesn't. Yeah. It's
not here yet.
The earth is here.
Yeah,
and it's not a complete replacement. It's not a replacement. I think it's a resurrection. I think that's how Peter envisions it, and I think Paul probably too. Is that just like there's continuity between our body, our current body, and our resurrected body. I think there's continuity and discontinuity between the current earth and the renewed earth. That it's not the same, but it's not like completely ditch that and start from scratch. I think this is, some people are going to say, well, doesn't Peter say that the earth is burned up? And he does, but this is 2 Peter 3, which I happen to know pretty well. And Peter is speaking, what Peter's doing in that chapter is talking about these big cosmic destructions and renewals of the earth. The first, so he emphasizes how the earth is created out of water, the Genesis 1 story, and then sort of goes back into water at the flood. And then that's the world we live on now. And then in the future, that flood, the universality of the flood is going to come back, but it's going to come back looking like the Sodom story, which he talked about, the fire, right? Yeah. And so it's going to be universal like the flood, but fiery like Sodom. And the world's going to be destroyed, but then the new heavens and new earth come out of that. So I think Peter envisions it as, in some sense, similar, though obviously in some ways different, to the way the flood destroyed the earth and it recreated out of that. So yes, it's different, but it's also connected. It's the same. The earth is laid bare or whatever by the fire, but it's renewed. Yeah. And what Peter says, and what Peter and Paul say again, is that all the hope, it's specifically the hope of the resurrection and the hope of the new creation that's supposed to drive our Christian sort of push for sanctification and holiness, right? Peter says, if all these things are going to be dissolved, like
what manner of
life you should be. according to his promise, we are waiting for new heavens and new earth. And so, since you are waiting for these things, be diligent to be found without blemish and at peace, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's in light of the fact that we're going to be renewed and we're going to be a part of a new creation, we're going to want to become as close as we can to this to fit into this new creation as possible through God's Spirit.
And that includes, I think, for the New Testament authors, that includes what we do with our body. That's part of why what we do with our bodies matters. And this is another contrast to, say, maybe some of the proto-Gnostics or whatever, who sort of thought that, well, if the body ultimately doesn't matter, or it's evil or whatever, then, and I am a soul that's sort of separate from that in some sense, then what I do with the body is of no ultimate account,
right.
Doesn't matter in some sense, right?
As long as my spirit is good.
As long as my spirit's good, I can sleep around whatever I want, and that's not really me, and it doesn't matter. That's just going trash. And
some scholars think Paul's kind of really speaking to those people
exactly
in 1 Corinthians.
Right. And so Paul says, no. The reason why sexual immorality is such a problem, like, it's something you do with your body, but your body matters, and your body is made for the Lord, for the future resurrection. And so it's not something that you can just treat as something that's going to be trashed. Mm-hmm. Like, if you really believe this is going to be raised from the dead, you better treat it like that. And don't go around sinning in your body.
Right. And he speaks of the body as the temple.
Right. The temple of the Spirit, which starts now, but that is awaiting the culmination when it's a renewed body, the temple of the Spirit. Yeah. Yeah.
And to Paul, the fact that the Spirit is within our bodies now is evidence that those bodies are going to be transformed.
Exactly. That's part of the future transformation.
And if this is the temple of that Spirit now, you better believe that it matters what you do with your body, right?
Exactly. So it's far from being this sort of earthy hope that kind of takes the spirituality out of Christianity. For Paul and the New Testament authors and Jesus, it's that very hope of the resurrection that is supposed to drive you to holiness and to caring about what you do with the body.
Yeah.
As well as, on the flip side, and the testimonies of some of the early martyrs are this way, the willingness to lose the body is also made more possible by the hope of the resurrection. It's not oh, bummer, I lost, we lose, at least I'll get to go to heaven, but no, it's that, hey, I mean, in the famous passage in 2 Maccabees, this is before Christ, but this shows the hope that kind of really gets strengthened out in the early Christian movement. But it's these 7 brothers that are getting horribly tortured by this Hellenistic king, and they're like, cut me up, do whatever you want, because God's going to give me back my bodies, so whatever, Yeah. And that's kind of how the early Christian martyrs, I think, faced their deaths, is that do what you want, but I happen to know Jesus is already raised from the dead, so it's kind of a done deal. Like, Jesus is Lord, as N.T. Wright says. Caesar is not, and so whatever you guys think is going on here, I happen to know that someday, like, Jesus is back.
My side gets vindicated.
Yeah, and not in just some sort of ethereal sense, but like, I'm actually coming back in a body, and Jesus is going to be back. Jesus has a body, and he's coming back to the earth, and we win, right? Yeah. So
that's amazing.
So just like we talked about, the dualism can kind of create a false, an unhelpful asceticism. The doctrine of the resurrection can help to foster a healthy self-denial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Well, a couple of questions I'm sure people have. You talked about one of them already, which is the Peter idea of like everything getting burned up. Mm-hmm. The second one that immediately comes to my mind, and I've heard a lot of people give this kind of rebuttal, is, well, Jesus talks about going to prepare a place. There's many mansions in the King James.
Yeah, but that's a bad translation.
Isn't it sort of like temporary dwelling places?
Yeah, or just dwellings or something. Yeah.
And so he says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. If it were not so, I would have told you. So to some people, to most people, when they read that, they think, oh, that's heaven. Jesus is making a nice place for us, so we shouldn't be concerned about the future.
Right.
So from this resurrection point of view, like, what was going on there with what Jesus said?
Yeah. So I have to remember that elsewhere Jesus talks. So when say Peter talks about, this is that great line where Jesus is like, hey, if you, whoever leaves houses and brothers and whatever, will receive all sorts of great things. And Peter is like, we've left everything and followed you. And Jesus is like, good. In the palingenesia, in the new Genesis, the new creation, when everything's restored, you will receive all sorts of things and judge the 12 tribes of Israel or whatever. So it's like this very strong idea of like Jesus is working in this understanding that they've given stuff up and that will be repaid to them in the renewal of the world, the remaking of the world, which is something Jesus is very much in that resurrection movement, school of thought in Judaism. And then when Jesus resuscitates Lazarus, Lazarus isn't raised from the dead in the sense that Jesus is, because the poor chap has to die.
Is it a different word and everything? Or is
no, it's the same.
Same word.
It's the same idea. I think it's the same wording. Yeah, but there's this understanding that
he's going to die again.
Yeah, and he's still mortal. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. That being resurrected means that you are, like, truly resurrected means you're immortal, and you belong to a world that hasn't been quite made yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is why I was so surprised. Like, Lazarus raised from the dead, that's crazy.
That's awesome.
But we had people in the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's happened a few times. It's pretty cool.
Great miracle.
Like, right.
But when Jesus rose from the dead, that was transformative. Why? Because that resurrection was the start of the new age.
Right.
God's future fulfillment actually has already started to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So when Jesus and that we should talk more about, but like when Jesus says to Mary, do you believe that, do you believe that he'll rise again? And she says, yeah, of course I believe he'll rise again on the last day. That's when resurrection happens. Yeah. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. And there's this sense in which it's unclear what he's meaning there, but the disciples certainly later on come to realize that the whole understanding of what the future resurrection would be becomes sort of centered around Jesus' own resurrection. And that's where Mary's idea of this future resurrection of the righteous or whatever, they're like, whoa, when Jesus is raised from the dead, that's all still true, but it's all around him. So that I bring that up just to say this is happening in John's gospel. Yeah. Right? Before this other passage you're talking about. Then at the end of John's gospel, Jesus rises from the dead, and then he goes and like cooks breakfast for his disciples and eats fish and all that kind of stuff with them. Very much resurrection embodied and all this stuff. So there, where he talks about leaving them and the Spirit coming to them and then coming back, we're seeing them again. We shouldn't pull that out and say, oh, what he's doing is creating a final state where they're going to live up there. Yeah. He's certainly enabling them to be there with him in the intermediate state, and he's continuing the work that he started in readying all things for the future, the final state.
So do you think possibly John is intentionally including that passage because of just many of the disciples dying?
Possibly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's possible for sure, because he writes later. Yeah. And he has that little great ending about how, people keep saying that John is like not going to die, but Jesus didn't say that. So there's obviously probably a lot of the others have died already and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I think is really interesting, and when I was reading N.T. Wright's book, The Resurrection of the Son of God, it's a huge book. It's awesome. And I'm
like halfway through, but I need to finish it. So good though.
But that was my copy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I took your copy back. Yes. So I'm almost done. Very end. But so he talks about the way Jesus after the resurrection is appears to them. And he's obviously physical and obviously Jesus, sort of, but he's also weird and different. And they have almost like they don't recognize him, but they do.
Somehow he's with them.
Well,
and they don't quite get it.
There's that strange passage, say in John, where they dared not ask him who he was because they knew it was Jesus, and you're like, that is the weirdest thing to say, right? Like, what in the world? So they recognize, or on Emmaus, the road to Emmaus, like they do and don't know who it is. And then
in the road to Emmaus, they
didn't know.
They don't get it until.
But then all of a sudden they do.
Yeah, and you're like, how does that?
There's very strange stuff that goes on, and yet it's clearly he's not a phantom. He's like eating stuff. He's walking around. Yeah. He has nail prints and all this kind of stuff. So, and I really, and this is one of the things I think that really kind of led to the Christian understanding that this is indeed, among other things, this is indeed the beginning of the resurrection, the final resurrection of all things. It's not sort of Jesus, as I like to say, it's not that Jesus hit death, went into death and bounced back out, but he went through it, and he's still human, he's still physical, but he's transformed. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily think that in the new earth we'll be able to walk through doors and stuff, but I mean maybe, but I think that that seems odd because what's the point of a door if you can walk through it?
Yeah, right. But isn't the point in that passage is that Jesus doesn't quite fit in the old?
Exactly.
Creation?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. We have the Jesus who's a new creation guy who's interacting in the old creation world, and so there's like glitches in a sense, right? It's strange.
That's a great way to put it.
And so but there's enough continuity that he can still eat, and there's still a lot of similarity.
Yeah. The point is being clearly made that this is like this is an earthy guy still.
Yeah. And yet there's something different about him. He can't die anymore. Mm-hmm. And he's different, right? And I really think that C.S. Lewis encapsulates this idea. And Paul talks about being further clothed. We talked about this before, right? In Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, where he talks about...
I love that book. Yeah, it's controversial, but I love it.
It's a great book. Yeah. I don't know. I still don't know why there's a bus. But it's awesome. Yeah. So, and he talks about heaven as being this place when this guy gets there, he's almost not quite... He has to kind of adjust to it. Mm-hmm. And it's because everything is like more firm or more like
more tangible,
more real. Yeah. That every blade of grass almost hurts to walk on because it's more like more material than it was, or it's more like there's more to it in a sense. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about the future creation, is that it's sort of more real, and it's as Paul says, being further clothed. It's not like less real, less human, less physical, but more robust and more, more.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
And it helps, I think, because of this, it's always a temptation to tend to think of the future because we don't see it yet as less real in some sense, as sort of like, we can touch the table, we can experience reality right now. But when it comes to like what heaven is going to be like, then we start switching to this sort of other more mysterious.
Yeah, but that's because we've spiritualized it all.
Yeah,
that's the up problem.
Sure. Yeah,
it's a lot easier for me to think of something as tangible that I think will happen in the future, much more than that's something true. That I think is up there in a realm that I have no connection to.
But here's where I'm going with that. I think if we think about, okay, after we die, we have new bodies, but it is somewhat of a different experience somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Immortality and stuff. And we're not quite sure what that's like, but particularly using that phrase of like more real, right. I think really helps to catch the sense that it's like this in so many ways, and yet it's more this in just the right sort of ways.
Exactly. And that's what you would expect from the God who created the world. As Lewis said, God likes matter. After all, he invented it. Right. So, and I think one of the concluding things to say is that for me, the Christian hope of the resurrection makes Christianity seem far less religious than it otherwise would. I don't, because it's the continuation of the story of creation. It's about what will really happen in the future. It's almost like history.
So is what you're saying, like there's a sense in which religion or like the incense and candles or whatever is sort of in some ways detached from real life.
Yeah, kind of. It feels like this strange space that like, yeah, you interact with God and very mystical stuff or whatever, and then you go back into real life.
Yeah.
Right. And sort of politics and art and food and all that stuff that's real life. And then there's like, you go and sort of pray and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. You try to be a good person so you go to heaven or whatever, right? But the hope of the resurrection doesn't allow for any of that. Oh. And it says that the Christian hope is something that's all encompassing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have boundaries on it that end at the church door. Mm-hmm. It's something that, like, Jesus' claim to be the ruler of the world is not a metaphor. Like, Jesus actually is a human who has the rightful rule over everything and will take that rule someday. That's so crucial. And that's, if we could have a timeline, we could plot that on the timeline, mm-hmm. right? Because there was another time 2,000 years ago where if you had a video camera, you would have seen the risen Jesus, right? It happened. And so this means that what I'm waiting for, how I'm trying to live, all the real life stuff has all these implications about maybe not religious things, but what is true? How should I see the world if I know that Jesus actually did rise from the dead, mm-hmm. and eventually I will rise from the dead too, and like all those things look different, and have all these sorts of implications about faithfulness, about how I connect myself, how much I connect myself to sort of the partisan debates of the age. All those types of things. The fact
that our loyalties are as Christians, are very clearly with our King.
Yeah, we
already have
who's not metaphorically like the ruler of the world, but like, I mean, right now he's still waiting to kind of, but it's real. Yeah. Like it's real, and that's something that I think distinguishes Christianity, and obviously the Judaism that came before it or whatever, from sort of other religions, but also maybe the sort of almost deistic or vaguely theistic religion of the West.
Yeah.
Sub-Christian. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. This really feeds my soul. Not in a dualistic sense.
Okay.
Wow, yeah. It's I think it does something for me to go back to what our foundations are as Christians, and just think about, again, the hope that Paul and Peter and others so often reference.
Yeah.
The hope, the blessed hope.
Yeah. Peter says. The hope that is waiting, as Peter says, waiting to be revealed at the last time.
Yeah. Just to think about what that means, and to think about its rootedness in what it means to be a human.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's beautiful and it's true, and it's something that the more we understand, the more it'll shape not just like the way we think, but like the way we live. And
yeah. Because your sanctification ultimately is about you will culminate in the resurrection, right?
Yep.
But it's about you becoming more human, not less human.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of encapsulates one of the big differences between a heaven approach, for lack of a better term, and a resurrection approach.
Yeah.
So the other approach is almost about me becoming less human over time.
Mm-hmm.
And the resurrection says, no, it's about you becoming more fully human.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is the same thing as saying becoming more like Jesus, who was the truly human, So, yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us in this discussion. This has been really fun and really good. So see you all next time.